Okay, let's take a look at meat production methods. So what this is going to tell you about how we produce the animals for food that you and I eat. This is a little clip from The Simpsons. It is just the little episode where Lisa becomes a vegetarian. And so we're going to take a look. Well, actually, we're not going to take a look at that. You can go back and look at that later if you're interested in this. It's kind of funny and silly at the same time. All right, here is a graphic that just shows you the amount of land it takes to produce either animal foods or plant foods. So, what you should get from this graphic is it takes 20 times more land to produce the same amount of calories from meat as it does from plants. So, if I can see beef here, I've got 30 meters squared, and then all the way down to vegetables, potatoes, and fruits, almost zero, but a lot less than 10 meters squared to produce 1 kilogram of food. Okay, this is a graphic that shows you what is the global surface area allocation for food production in the world. So if you look at this graphic very carefully, 29% of the world's land the surface of the earth is land. So only 29%. The rest is ocean. Out of that 29%, only 71% of that is habitable land. And out of that 71%, 50% is agriculture. And out of that 50%, 77% of that goes to livestock. So that's a tremendous amount of land that we're using for food production, especially of animals. Now, if we take a look at this, this is going to tell you how much water does it take to produce the same amount of calories from beef as from eggs and plants. So it takes a whole lot more water to produce beef than it does even pork or chicken, but also way more than soy or eggs. So it's just very resource intensive to produce food from animals. Okay, so what are the ways that we produce food of animal nature? The first one here is called a CAFO. So if you look at this, it means concentrated animal feeding operation. So this is a high density animal farming feedlot. You can see in the pictures we've got chickens here, but this could be used for beef cattle or dairy cows or hogs or poultry. We have probably all of those in North Carolina, maybe not quite as many beef cattle as we do hogs and poultry. But these are very high density feedlots that raise a lot of animals in a short time, very resource intensive, and getting as much food to them as you can and growing them up as quickly as you can so that you can sell them to market. Okay, what do we know about CAFOs? We have very little room for the animals to move around because if we want to make it efficient, we've got to have as many animals as we can in as small a space as we can to save money and save resources. So some of these animals are confined or allowed very little room or movement for entire or all of their life cycle. The cows here are on a big feedlot at the top, but the pigs here in the bottom are in kind of metal pens, and sometimes you have one pig per pen, and they really cannot even turn around. They do give a lot of antibiotics and nutrient supplements to these animals to minimize disease and malnutrition. So when you have a lot of animals crowded in a very short, small space, then what you're going to have there is much more likelihood of disease. And so sometimes antibiotics is given to these animals just as a preventative. They're not sick necessarily. It's just put in the food that they eat so they will not get sick. And this also leads to antibiotic resistance, which we'll talk about in a minute. So sometimes farmers have stopped doing this. Okay, what are the economic benefits of factory farms or CAFOs? You can minimize your land cost because you've got everybody in a small space. You can improve the efficiency of feeding these animals. You can increase the fraction of food energy that goes into production of body mass. And if you look at the graphic here, it's showing you from 1982 to 2012, we've had a great increase in the number of factory farms, going from about 3,600 to about 20,000 in 2012. And we should get an updated stat here so that we could know in 2021 how many factory farms do we have. Okay, what are some of the environmental drawbacks to CAFOs or concentrated animal feeding operations? You can get antibiotic resistant bacteria, which is going to be a real problem. So this means that a bunch of bacteria are out there, including one little resistant variety. These all get bathed in antibiotics. Most of those bacteria die, but the my resistant bacteria multiplies and becomes more common. And eventually, the entire infection or entire bacterial species will evolve into a resistant strain in which you can't treat it with medicine anymore. So we are very worried about this because the common use of antibiotics in farm animals on a regular basis just to prevent them from getting sick leads to more antibiotic resistant bacteria out there in the world. And doctors are worried that someday we will not have the medicines we need to treat simple things like strep throat. And this is coming from places like animal feeding operations where you're giving lots of antibiotics to a whole lot of animals in a small space. What are some other issues here with factory farms? One is diseases. There are diseases like mad cow disease. This is not a very prevalent or widespread disease. It's probably something in the US you might not have to worry about, but this disease has shown up in the UK, and I think I've heard of a recent case of it too. But a few years ago, it became kind of a problem in the UK. They had to destroy some cows because of this, and also in Europe. And we had a couple of cases in the United States, not a lot, but a few. So, what does mad cow do? Mad cow disease messes with the proteins in your brain, and it unfolds them and refolds them in a bad way, and it causes you health effects later on in life. And the problem with this disease, and why we're highlighting it here, even though it's not really widespread or common, is that you don't know you have it until many, many, many years later after you've eaten that hamburger that was infected with this. So they've got to figure out which cows are infected and make sure that they destroy those and then get them out of the herds so that they don't spread this. And like I said, it has not been a huge problem in the US in recent years, but it is out there. And so that's one thing you have to take into consideration when you're going to eat animals. Okay, the biggest problem here, I think, not necessarily the biggest problem, but one of the bigger problems is waste disposal. So anytime you have animals, you're going to have poop and you're going to have pee and you're going to have a lot of it, and you got to do something with it. So because there's so many animals in a small space, the average CAFO produces the amount of manure that a town of 5,000 humans would produce, and I have to put that somewhere. So what am I going to do with all of that manure? In the top picture, what you're seeing is lagoons made by farmers where they're pumping some of that waste into the lagoons and putting bacteria in there to hopefully digest it. But sometimes it goes into waterways and gets into groundwater and it runs off. So it depends on how good the system is for capturing all that and how good it is for withstanding things like hurricanes or big rains, because if it spills over, it may contaminate local waterways. And we will see a little clip in a video about this happening in North Carolina. Okay, this is a little graphic here. CAFO's designed to pollute. Obviously, it's an anti-factory farm picture here. This is a picture of a farm in Michigan with approximately 4,000 dairy cows, and that's kind of a lot. So it has all the places where they have stormwater catch basins and storage staging bunkers and runoff and all kinds of stuff. So you have to look at where all this water is going, where's the waste going, and the general idea here is that that's problematic for the surrounding environment in many ways. And then we've got ethical concerns here. So we can see these pictures of all these chickens crowded together, pigs in these little pens where they cannot even turn around. And then you've got all of these cows in these giant, giant feedlots. So some people think that just basically it is not a good idea to treat animals like this and that we should not be doing this in the first place. Pigs are really smart and smarter than the average dog. So they definitely know what's going on. They feel pain. I can say they have a super happy life being confined in those pens. A lot of people are very concerned about this, and they just simply don't want this to happen, just out of pure ethical concern. Okay, what about the nutritional content of the food, though? If I grow my cow on a grass pasture versus a grain pasture, grain is not what cows are supposed to eat. They're supposed to eat grass. But when you are in a CAFO or a factory farm, you're not eating grass. So you are confined to a feedlot, and you're given basically corn and soy and lots of other grain products. And it is really not naturally what the cow is supposed to eat. So you can eat from the pasture, or you can eat corn, soy, and other things. You can live out on the pasture in the sunshine, or you can be in a feedlot. You can have no hormones or antibiotics, or be given lots of medicine. So this graphic here is telling you that grass-fed beef is superior in nutrition. I would argue with that in some cases, but I've also learned a lot about nutrition in the past few years. But that's what they're professing, is that the grass-fed beef is better for you. However, the grass-fed animals take lots and lots of resources, so there's a trade-off there. Okay, what's another way that we could possibly raise animals for food? We could do free range grazing, just like we looked at before just a second ago with the grass fed beef. You could have open range lands here used for grazing cattle. This is the most common use of land in the United States, not in North Carolina, but further to the west, lots and lots of grazing land. Okay. Here's a picture of the earth and all the rangelands that are existing on the earth. So you can see that in North Carolina, we really don't have that going on. But in the west of the United States, tremendous amount of rangeland, either remote, residential, or populated. And you can see all over Asia here, in the Middle East and Africa and South America and Australia, lots of grazing land. Here's a great picture here of rangeland in the United States. And what you gotta realize is each dot on this map represents 25,000 acres. That is a tremendous amount of rangeland. When my son moved a few years ago to Phoenix, Arizona, right over here, we drove across country to get there and help him move. And we went through Oklahoma and the top of Texas. Huge amount of rangeland that we saw just doing that one little drive. So we've got a lot of it. Okay, what are the benefits of doing raising animals on ranges? Ungulates or hoofed animals can be raised on land that's too dry to farm. So let's say you've got a land that you're just not going to be very productive on as far as growing crops. I can put animals there. It uses less fossil fuel energy than a feedlot altogether, because I'm just letting these animals graze on the land, and I'm not having to bring in lots of manufactured corn and soy and all kinds of things like that. There are vulnerability to fires with rangelands, so we have to be careful of that because sometimes they're dry. And we do sometimes have stream bank erosion. So in other words, if we've got a lot of animals on these lands, then they can hang out at the side of the streams and they will knock the dirt into the water and erode that. So we have to watch out for that on the land. And then we've got pollution of surface waters also. So sometimes you see these cows are in the stream here and they're having a nice drink of water. But if they poop and pee in the stream, then all that's going to go in wherever that stream goes. And so that is another drawback there. And then I could have overgrazing. So what happens if I graze my cattle way too much on this land? Look at what's going to happen. You can see the left is overgrazed and the right is land that has not been overgrazed. So overgrazing leaves my land exposed to wind erosion, and the soil is no longer able to retain the water, and my biodiversity is going to decrease. Here's a picture of biodiversity before grazing and after grazing. So you can see before grazing, I've got so many creatures here. Just loads and loads of creatures. And after grazing, I just don't have enough to support that much biodiversity. So I've lost a whole bunch of it. But who determines the soil condition here? If I look at this, there's lots of people who work on soil. Poor soil doesn't have any nutrients or ability to hold moisture. So environmental organizations say that up to 55% of U.S. rangeland soils are in poor condition due to overgrazing. So this environmentalists are saying that we're not doing a good job here. But the Bureau of Land Management says we disagree. So there's not an agreement here. The BLM says, no, we're okay. And environmental organizations say, no, we're not okay. So a long time ago in 1934, an act called the Taylor Grazing Act was passed in an effort to preserve the grazing lands over the U.S. This is from President Roosevelt. It converted federal rangelands from a commons system into a permit-based grazing system. So in other words, you had to have permits to graze your cattle on the land. The problem was the permits didn't cost very much. So because they didn't cost too much, it encouraged people to continue to overgraze because all you had to do was buy a few more permits and it didn't really cost you that much, and therefore you could still overgraze the land for your own benefit. And it turns out that the government spends 7 times more money on managing these areas than it actually received in fees. So, just like the logging we talked about the other day, the grazing is effectively subsidized because it is not costing the people who own the cattle nearly as much as it should to use that land. Okay, what does the BLM do? Bureau of Land Management. They have requirements to focus on the health of watersheds, habitat restoration, and ecological protections. All those sound really good. We want to preserve our rangelands. The BLM is in charge of this. But here's the problem. There aren't any real requirements to involve environmental scientists in this work, so you may not really get what you need as far as regulations go. And every state and regional manager has their own thing that they have to do. So each state is going to possibly have different guidelines, laws, standards, and that's not a very nationally comprised system, and it's not going to make for the same cases in one state to another. So the state of Oklahoma might be different than the state of Nebraska, and you might have different regulations going on there, and that's a problem. Okay, so why should we reduce our meat consumption overall? It's going to reduce CO2 emissions, methane, and nitrous oxide emissions. So lots and lots of greenhouse gases will be saved from going into the atmosphere if we don't eat as much meat. It will conserve water. You can see that it takes 52 gallons of water for irrigating feed crops. And so it's going to take a lot of water for just growing enough beef to make one hamburger. Would reduce the number of antibiotics and growth hormones out there in the world, which is good for all of our health in the future. I would improve my topsoil because I wouldn't have large numbers of heavy animals grazing on there. And then there's ethical concerns about the treatment of animals, which is a big deal. So you can see, just to make this one hamburger patty here, I need 6.7 pounds of grains, 52 gallons of water, 74.5 square feet of grazing land, and 1,036 BTUs of feed production, fossil fuel energy. So we're going to watch a couple of things about meat production and something about a plant-based burger option and see what you think about that. So it's something that we need to think about. Can we reduce our meat consumption for the better of the planet and the animals and possibly your own health?